A lot of you believe that if you're scared enough or angry enough, or if your livelihood depended on it, or the livelihood of your loved ones depended on it, you'd be able to fight. Some of you believe that if you're in that situation, you wouldn't be able to fight. But the bottom line is that in order to be proficient at protecting yourself, you need to be able to separate the violence from the violence. You have to be able to look at martial arts, combat sports, as a skill set as opposed to something that is triggered by either anger or fear. With my students, I'm realizing that this is a very important hurdle to overcome when it comes to giving them skills, practical skills that they can actually use and turn on and turn off if need be. I have a lot of students that step on the mat for the first time and they get overzealous. You can tell by the way that they're maybe hitting the bag that there's some sort of emotional connection happening. They're burning themselves out. They're getting tired quick. I also have students that when they step on the mat for the first time, they're very, very hesitant in making contact. Countless amounts of times I've had students that are just starting off, and we're maybe going over something where they have to actually hit their training partners or me, and they have a hard time mustering up the courage to do something like that. And I was talking to a student the other day, about how it's important that needs to be separated from the equation. We have to be able to separate the fear, separate the anger, the violence from the activity of protecting yourself and building the skills. Now, inherently, it's going to involve a lot of reprogramming. Hitting something, punching something, kicking something, are all things that from a young age we've all been programmed to associate with anger, with fear, and with emotions. So training people, a lot of times what I'm realizing is that along with the physical training that we do, we also have to mentally prepare ourselves by separating those high emotions from the activity of, for example, throwing punches or wrestling or whatever it is that you might be doing. It has to be a separation. We find ourselves, or we will find ourselves in a situation where we don't react accordingly or appropriately to circumstances because we let our emotions take control, or we let our emotions make us freeze. So it's very, very important to try to separate the violence, disconnect, and just do the physical activities. And that happens when you repetition is basically the way to do it. But that initial fear, the initial anger, all of those things in a training environment, in a working environment, in a collective environment, because when you're training, you're not training with people that you're angry with. And I always tell people that in martial arts, we let our friends beat us up so our enemies can't. And I think that it's a good way, because now when you're training with training partners that you end up developing relationships with, you end up actually liking a lot of them, believe it or not. Those are the ones that try to punch you in your face the most. I think it's a great training environment where you eventually become able to perform the task, throw the punches, throw the kicks at somebody, and even depending on the level, you can throw those punches and kicks at somebody full speed. You can throw them as close as you could possibly get with the intention of hurting them, and you actually like them. And you even see it in professional fighting, where the guys will start off before the fight with the utmost respect for each other. And then after 25 minutes of almost trying to kill each other, they, without hesitation, snap right out of it and give each other a hug and resume that respectful, admirable relationship that they started off with. Most cases, a lot of the beefs and the personal stuff that happens is really just for us, the fans, so we can get emotionally invested into a fight. But these guys that are doing it at the highest level, they don't have any real beef with the person that's standing in front of them that they're tasked to knock their head off. They don't have anything personally against them. Some of them even train with each other. A lot of them have a high level of respect for each other. But they're able to turn the skill set on and off at will. And I believe that putting it in the context of self-defense, it's the best way to go forward, to move forward, and to progress. Because you don't want to be waiting for your emotions to be able to act in a self-defense situation. You don't want to overreact when we're in a self-defensive situation. You don't want to be frozen and freeze in a self-defense situation. So we need to separate the emotions from the activity, and that's going to better prepare us to actually be able to use those skills if we need it, when we need it. It doesn't do you any good. And a lot of times, and the reason why I decided to make this video is because a lot of times we think that our anger, our fear, our emotions is going to get us through a situation if we're ever faced with one. But in reality, it'll actually hinder us. It'll actually make us do things that are not to our benefit. So we have to consciously separate the emotions from the training. And I would say this with 100% confidence: if you're unable to separate the emotions, you're not going to last long. I mean, a lot of that has to do with ego, and this is something that you hear us say a lot. Well, when you step into a gym, is we check the ego at the door. When you step in, you're going to be the nail a lot of the times. And you quickly have to get over the fact that you're not able to impose your will. So just the way that the process plays out, where you start off, you don't know what you're doing. When you start off, you feel confused. That humbling experience, I believe, is a very important part of the process, because it gives you no other choice but to check that ego. And a lot of times it's the ego that promotes the fear. It's the ego that makes you angry. And just by chance, I don't know if it's necessarily by design, the process involves a long time of checking that ego. As a matter of fact, the ego is checked immediately, and you don't necessarily get to, I guess, use your ego until you've learned how to check it. So it's a great way to, it works out nicely. And like I said, those who are unable to check that ego, and I've seen it many a times, where especially, you get a pretty strong person that comes in with, we'll call it false confidence, thinking that their size or their strength or their previous athletic experience, they think that they're going to hit the ground running, and they're used to being physically dominant. That person has a very hard time checking that ego. But also on the flip side, the person that might be frail, that might be scared, their problem isn't necessarily an ego, but their problem is an emotional problem, where they don't feel comfortable hitting someone, hitting something. They don't feel comfortable exerting force. And for some, that's a huge obstacle. And that's up to us as instructors, as coaches, to create a first welcoming environment and also an encouraging environment to push that person along and help them find their power. But the bottom line is this: emotions and self-defense are like oil and water. It's a disaster, no matter how you cut it, and it can play out in so many different disastrous ways. It's always going to be a good idea to separate that emotion from the training. Like I said, yes, we are learning violence, but we're learning physical violence. We're checking the psychological and the emotional violence at the door. Because in order to really become proficient at violence, you can't be violent mentally and emotionally. All right, guys, gotta run. Coach Sully, Reps and Sweat Martial Arts and Fitness. This was Mat Chat.